Hi there, I'm Matthew.
I'm Aaron, and now we are talking about the one, the only, Irish Dry Stout. I say that Irish Dry Stout is an actual recognized term by the BJCP. However, most people are going to know the style by the style's ambassador, and that is Guinness. The style, even though you would think it would be a really dark, heavy style, an Irish Dry Stout stylistically is very, very low in alcohol. It's a very, very sessionable beer. They do that because they want to be able to watch a soccer game for 90 minutes, keep drinking beer. They don't want to get completely sloshed while they're doing it. And they want it to be a nice, enjoyable, extended experience. So even though a lot of people think that an Irish Dry Stout would be a little bit higher in alcohol, it actually is while still very dark, it's a very light in body, low ABV, very pleasant drinking beer.
That's right. And Guinness, as Aaron mentioned, is certainly the quintessential example of this style. In fact, it's really the beer that caused the style to become a style, or the need for there to be a separation of the style. Now, historically, Guinness actually used to be referred to as a porter. It was actually called a stout porter, and stout was used as an adjective to describe the style of beer, which was a porter. However, this is back in the 1700s, and throughout the years, definitions have changed, beer styles have evolved, and so stout became its own style separate from the porter. Guinness was founded and has been brewed since 1759 at the St. James Gate Brewery. It's very light, as Aaron mentioned. You shouldn't be intimidated simply because it's a dark black colored beer or dark brown colored beer. It actually is very easy to drink. It's not the meal in the glass that it's sometimes referred to as. Now, this bottle is very interesting. Guinness actually in the 1970s developed what's called a nitrogen widget, sometimes referred to as a rocket widget. And what it is it's basically a little capsule that's filled with nitrogen gas, and it works as a one-way valve. So then when it gets tipped to a certain angle, it releases nitrogen gas. Now, Guinness on draft, as many of you may have seen, is poured via a nitrogen system. What that does is it's basically a different gas mixture than what's typically poured. It's 75% nitrogen to 25% CO2.
And in a regular tap, it's almost the same numbers, right? But they're reversed.
Absolutely.
So it would be something more like 70 or 75% CO2 and 25 or 30% nitrogen. So it's just taking a regular beer tap and reversing the nitrogen and the nitrogen and the CO2 content, which are the only gases present, right?
Absolutely.
Because it's a keg, no oxygen, no outside air, right? It's a completely closed system.
And because it's so rich in nitrogen, and nitrogen is a much less soluble gas than CO2 is, you can actually pressurize the kegs and the bottles to a much higher pressure than you can with a normal beer, simply because of the gas mixture. So what this widget does is it essentially replicates the pour of a draft Guinness from a bottle, so that each time you drink from the bottle, it releases just a little bit of nitrogen, which gives you a very creamy mouthfeel, which Guinness is known for. It's got that nice, creamy, foamy head on it. However, we're going to approach it a little bit differently, aren't we?
Okay. That's right. We're going to do one standard vigorous pour, see if we can get just all that nitrogen to release all at once, like it does out of a draft. There are a couple different formats you can get this in. This is the bottle. The widget that Matthew was referring to earlier comes in the canned form. Well, is there a widget in here too?
There sure is.
Oh, there is? Okay. So there's a widget in here. There's also a widget in the canned form. You can shake it around and hear it if it's in the can.
Absolutely. It looks like a little plastic bullet if one were so inclined as to break one of these bottles. Although,
which I've done.
And from personal experience, I have as well. It's actually very difficult to break these bottles because they're lined in plastic.
Guinness really doesn't want you to know how their widgets work. Ask Left Hand.
That's right. Well, let's go ahead and try it. This is a beer that I think most people are pretty familiar with, or at least are recognize for sure.
That's true. That's true. Now, there's a very, if you look at another training video section, we'll go over how to pour a Guinness, but there's a very specific way that you need to pour Guinness on draft. It's a very specific two-step pour. So go ahead and refer to your video on how to pour the Guinness if you're pouring it on draft.
However, for the bottles, you can go ahead and just take a one-step pour, and you pour it actually pretty rough. You go ahead and tilt the bottle out and go ahead and fill up the glass, and the head and the nitrogen will develop organically.
And that's what you want. I know it seems like the beer is going to overflow, pouring it that vigorously. The head's going to overflow, but it won't, we promise.
You see, the difference between a nitrogen poured bottle and a CO2 poured bottle is that CO2 develops from the bottom up, which can lead to spillage, capsizing over the top of your glass, whereas nitrogen actually really develops from the top down. So whatever your top line is, your beer will never overflow beyond that height in your glass.
Now, Matthew, this looks like a pretty big head. Is that right?
Yeah, it's typical. It's typical. You'll notice in most draft pours of a Guinness, you'll end up with actually about an inch and a half to an inch and a quarter in terms of head, and you really want that really foamy, creamy head. That's kind of the point of the nitrogen. So with a smaller head, you'd basically be detracting from really the shining star in the entire show.
That's true. All right. So I've always thought, Matthew, that Guinness was completely black, completely see-through. It's pretty dark in this studio right now, but I'm looking at this and I can see that there's a little bit of red tinge on the side. It's not completely black.
Absolutely. It's more of a mahogany type of a color.
Yeah, very
like a deep
rich,
mahogany. Yeah. I can see the refractions of light through the bottom of my glass, which indicates to me that it is filtered, it is clear. In fact, from personal knowledge, and a little side point, they actually use fish bladders to filter this beer. They use it as a filtration process. That's a fact. So, unfortunately, if you are a vegan, this is not a vegan beer.
But if you're not, you can say that you drank a beer with fish.
That's right.
Filtered with fish bladders.
Filtered with fish bladders. So yeah, very dark, which to the untrained beer aficionado, it indicates a heavy body, which as we're going to see is definitely not the case.
All right, let's smell. I get a very creamy, sweet smell. I don't get very much roast. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe it's there a little bit, but it's definitely a creamy, sweet smelling beer.
Almost like a chocolate milk. Like it seems to have a little bit of like a lactose milk sugar involved in it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where you definitely get a creamy, slightly sweet milk chocolate. There's a touch of roast, like a small amount of roast coffee that comes through, but really it has a lot more in common with a sweet stout than it would a larger, more roastier stout like an imperial stout.
I wonder if they add unfermentable lactose to this beer for mouthfeel. I'm not sure. All right, now for a Guinness, before you drink, I know you're supposed to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but look to the horizon, as they do in Dublin, and then you're supposed to drink under the beer. So under the head, right?
That's right.
You want to create a nice channel, right?
That's right. You want the beer to pass through the head, leaving the head, as opposed to drinking the head. So you got to tilt it back and then drink underneath the head.
All right.
Cheers.
Right, cheers to the horizon. And I should mention, you're never doing it right if you're not getting a nice creamy mustache.
In fact, Guinness, who are also the purveyors and keepers of the world records, you might know the famous book, the Guinness Book of World Records. According to the Guinness Book of World Records, there are 200,000 pints of Guinness lost in mustaches and beards annually.
I think that's the fact of the day right there, folks.
Yep. And I'd say this is classic in every sense of the word.
Yeah, it's very light-bodied, as we were talking about before. A lot of flavor, but it still's got a very, very light body. And that creaminess, even though it's a light body, the mouthfeel is still substantial for how low ABV.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's got a lot of quality. It's a lot of character to this beer. The flavors are well integrated into it. It's masterfully crafted, of course. They wouldn't have been making this beer for 250 plus years if it wasn't of high quality. But that sweetness is a little bit less substantial in the body of the beer and in the palate than it is in the nose. I seem to get a little bit more of almost like a dry chocolate or unsweetened chocolate with nice touches of peat and a little bit of like a roasted malt touch of coffee type flavor to it.
Yeah, there's really no mistaking when you taste this. You know right away what it is. Mm-hmm. There's no mistaking that it's Guinness. It tastes remarkably similar to when you have it on draft, too.
Absolutely.
I mean, that nitrogen widget really really nails it. I know it'd been around since the 1970s.
Yep, sure has. And, most brass taps are, in fact, I think every brass tap is going to be carrying this on draft.
Yeah.
And this is obviously a very well-recognized beer. People are going to order it simply out of habit because they always order a Guinness. Guinness lovers drink Guinness almost religiously. It's a part of the life, a part of the culture.
Is it true in Ireland, and Guinness is from Dublin, it's brewed in Dublin, is it true that they have to be certified, a pub has to be Guinness certified? Or?
The actual individual bartenders have to go through a certification.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. And if you get caught by supposedly the Guinness cops or the Guinness police, they can actually revoke the license of the bartender, and then furthermore can revoke the license from the bar. And you can only imagine what would happen to a bar in Ireland if you weren't allowed to pour Guinness. I mean, that's a death sentence. So.
Yeah.
Now, this is a great beer to recommend for guests that are looking, if for some reason they're not familiar with Guinness, which is going to be somewhat of a far cry, but somebody that's looking to foray into dark beers without all that body. And then also, interestingly enough, and maybe I'm full of interesting facts today, I'd be willing to bet dollars to donuts that whatever's on your draft list, Guinness is actually going to be the lowest caloric content on beer, or on your draft list. So if somebody's coming in looking for something light in terms of calories, Guinness is actually a really, really excellent recommendation for that.
Yeah, I can't think of a beer, especially something that would come in a 16, or if you're at a brass tap, we pour it in true 20-ounce glassware, which is an imperial pint, which is how they drink it in Guinness and in London. We serve it in a bigger glass than a 16-ounce glass. But if you do ounce by ounce, I can't think of a beer that's going to be less caloric than Guinness.
Not that we're going to carry on draft. It's about 125 calories for every 12 ounces. And if you compare that to some of our quote unquote light American beers, like a Bud Light,
Bud Light's 110, right?
Right, exactly. So it's only incrementally heavier in terms of calories than even a Bud Light is, which is surprising for anybody that hears that.
Yes, and I'm going to go on a limb and say this offers a little bit more flavor than something like a Bud Light or a Miller Lite.
I'm going to go ahead and agree with you on that.
Well, that's why they pay me the big bucks, Matthew. All right,
cheers,
let's watch a nice soccer game on the pitch.
On the pitch, the football game.
Oh, sorry. Shoot, yeah, I used the word pitch, but cheers.